Hello, and welcome to another episode of Discussions with David. I'm live streaming some kind of interview or on Monday an open mic every weekday at 10 a.m. Pacific, noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. GMT. Every broadcast goes out live on the Facebook pages of Popular Resistance, KBOO Community Radio, and elsewhere. They all get archived in the Discussions with David playlist on my YouTube channel and in podcast form as well. If you don't want to miss any, subscribe to This Week with David Rovics on any podcasting platform. Today's guest is Dezeray Lyn, who has been deeply involved with mutual aid projects such as Food Not Bombs and a network she co-founded called Love Has No Borders. As an organizer and medic, she's been involved with many aspects of the unfolding pandemic situation here in the United States. Her work has also taken her to other countries as well at certain junctures, as well as all over the U.S. Dezeray, it's great to have you on my little show. And I hope I didn't mess up your sleep schedule too much. You were working all night. And first of all, can I just ask you what would maybe normally be a fairly unimpressive question, but at the moment is, I think, of great interest, which is, what's your life been like over the past few days?
I think in a much lesser way than people that are at the center of it and are disproportionately affected by it, it's been just kind of surreal, like watching my community members get attacked and shot in the back with rubber bullets and mass arrested is, it's a bit hectic. And then coronavirus and all the ways that has affected our communities. So
Yeah, it's even that question is way too much to even try to answer, isn't it? What were you doing last night? Your work is very much related to the pandemic and many other things as well. I mean, which is not by accident. Are you a nurse? You got a degree recently, I believe.
yeah, I'm a nurse. I'm an LPN now. Things went very quickly once I graduated. I graduated in January, and then right away in March, I started working in a COVID unit. And I work in a subacute care area, so managing symptoms and trying to keep folks through their quarantine and get them through to where they'll be getting tested negatively and being able to go home. So that was kind of a surreal experience, and continue now. I'm working in what's considered in my facility a hot zone, where people that both are testing positive and people that are suspected positive symptomatic folks are. So providing supportive care and just being a part of the medical response to the virus has been, like both my work and my, personal life pretty much.
You just got this degree just when the pandemic hit. Was it sometime around then? I mean, I'm just going by Instagram posts that I follow you on Instagram, and I see your posts, and I haven't seen a CV of your recent degrees or whatever, but it looked like it was a recent thing that you just kind of threw yourself into the COVID ward with a nursing degree as soon as the pandemic hit. Was it coincidental, or you were gonna, because you've been doing medic work for a long time in one form or another, among other kinds of mutual aid work?
Yeah, like I graduated in January. I passed my state exams March 4th, but in the interim, I had gone to work with No More Deaths and, spent the month, doing the work there, but also studying and getting ready to pass my exam. And then I think a lot of people just kind of got thrown into it. But, I wanted to be a part of the response. I wanted to be, where I could connect with people that were infected and were afraid and were, subject to a lot of the false narratives and propaganda that are going on around the virus right now and how politicized it's become. So I thought it would be personally a good thing for me to be able to connect on an emotional and like a real human level with people, as a caregiver, but also just like a human being, and to hear people out, hear what they're afraid of, and and be able to kind of do what I can to be mutual aid and support, even in the context of a big like bureaucracy medical facility.
Yeah, right. And I, you know, it just it's there's just so many different places to go to try to. But what I want to do here, as overwhelming as the task is just try to paint a picture of what life is like around us right now and in the recent past. And I think for some people out there who might just be realizing that there are terrible inequities in this society that were a terrible problem before the pandemic hit, that are now being exposed in so many different ways. Can you just, you've lived in Tampa for a long time. I know you've traveled to Texas, New Mexico, Standing Rock, Europe, and many other places during the crisis in 2015, and a lot of other parts of the world. But just in terms of Tampa, can you just paint a picture of what life was like in Tampa before the pandemic hit? What were the inequities that you were dealing with on a daily basis in your life as an activist and as a medic?
For sure. Well, one thing is there's a metaphor that I've been referring back to a lot because it helps to process how things are the way they are. And I envision Tampa and this country in like a larger sense as like a house with a gaping hole in it. And it may not be flooded on a day where it's sunny, but when a storm comes through, everything's going to fall apart. So these issues that had been glaringly obvious and out in the open that no one wanted to do anything about, meaning the city and the state, and all the ways that they produced inequalities and disproportionate suffering for people here. We really noticed that, when Irma came through, but particularly when COVID happened. So right before COVID happened, we had, like we have now, a racist, very antagonistic police force that has committed anti-Black and brown violence, that has collaborated with ICE to detain people and violate their rights so that they can pass them off to ICE for deportation. And there was a lot of issues, like predominantly in Tampa, houselessness, like people that are unhoused are filling the streets of Tampa. We have like 1,600 unhoused folks in our county. So before COVID happened, there's people all over the streets, and there's a coordinated effort between, NGOs and also autonomous folks like, people organizing with Food Not Bombs that are going to respond to the need and give food shares where food shares are needed. Well, we were doing 2 shares a week. And when COVID hit, and our very impassioned ex-cop with racist policies mayor started a fight for the community, the Tampa community, to be safe against COVID, she completely left out the portion of the population that are living on the streets that are most susceptible to not only contracting the virus, but then to getting barricades to the healthcare that they needed to stay safe. So in our community, resources were shutting down left and right. Food shares were being canceled by NGOs that didn't feel safe going out and sharing food with people. So we ended up picking up, we're doing 5 food shares a week now for the last few months since COVID started, and trying to provide for in the way that we can, a group of folks who have had shower access, laundry access, public bathroom access, communications access, all cut from them, severed, within a period of a few days. And now, are having hygiene and sanitation, accessibility issues, and are terrified of getting the virus. People were fleeing Florida and desperately begging us to get them in contact with anyone who could get bus fare for them, who could get them, on a car to get out of Florida, So it was chaos that the city, created here by not including unhoused people in their pandemic response.
Where did people want to go? Were there rumors going around that the pandemic response for unhoused people was actually good somewhere in the country?
A few people wanted to go to New York. I mean, New York is obviously way more hit than Tampa is, but this goes along with the fact of when you don't have proper communications and proper access to see what places are the safest to go, you're like, people were making decisions based on that lack of, good real intel that they could use to make sure that they were not going from, the frying pan into the fire. So people were just wanting to get out of Florida because misinformation about being trapped here, and that DeSantis is a fascist. He's our governor, and they call him Mini Trump. And he was saying that he was going to stop people at the border, like accentuating our state borders, and saying that he was going to be holding people in quarantine if they wanted to enter our state. So, that was causing a lot of fear and panic. So people were mainly just like, get me the fuck out of Florida.
Interesting. And so it wasn't, New York, I wonder if New York was a destination just because people saw the governor of New York or the mayor of New York City on TV and they looked like they were trying to deal with the situation by the way they were talking anyway. So it looked like, okay, that's somewhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
The one of the many things that's so overwhelming about this situation is that, as you know, it's not just. The people that are most exposed in so many ways, who are suffering so terribly, like the unhoused community and getting cut off from access to all these things, and then there's just like the people who can afford to isolate themselves and who are not at risk of eviction or foreclosure, which we may be at this point talking about a minority of the society, actually, that is not at risk financially and is able to safely isolate themselves while essential workers expose themselves on their behalf or whatever, But even among the people who are able to isolate themselves, there's been a massive mental health crisis going on in terms of for them and for everybody. I mean, what they say even on NPR, the levels of depression and anxiety have doubled in society generally. But I wonder if that's been something that you've been dealing with in any number of different ways, and if you care to talk about that situation.
Yeah, one main thing is that the antidote to fear is knowledge. And if there was proper knowledge going out about like real threats from the virus, real ways to protect ourselves, and not all this propaganda that was politicizing a virus that could possibly, weaken Trump's chances of getting reelected or whatever, real information could have stemmed a lot of what's going on now. But yeah, there is people, we still are coping with people on a daily basis that are unhoused, that are thinking that it's a hoax,
Wow.
that, I don't see sick people in the streets. So is it really happening? Is this really going on? And then they're further exposing themselves to the virus because of such a lack of medical access. They're going into hospitals where, they're, working hard to treat COVID patients, and then going into this area where, as much as you try to separate people on triage, there's still risks that people are coming to the space where there are people that are positive for COVID. And, so they're exposing themselves to it, and it all is fed into by this tributary of information that's like, either it's misinformation or it's, we all need to get the fuck out of here and we need to head for the border, and all, it's all of this chaos and uncertainty that's exacerbated this way more than it needed to be. And then another like dangerous, toxic portion of this whole equation is that for weeks, starting from when we had two positive cases in our county, we had been calling the mayor's office, like, when are these hand washing stations going up for these folks? When are public bathrooms going up for these folks? Where they're going to be able to access, any kind of services to make sure that they're following the CDC guidelines that you're pushing, that, that you're mandating for the rest of us. When is this going to happen? And we were ignored, and given the same nonsense ad nauseum. And then, and then it was to a point where like, oh yeah, we're not doing anything after months of not, of not responding. And then suddenly the NGOs are all getting together and starting 100-person homeless encampment for COVID and putting people in tents with a bracelet, an ID bracelet that IDs their number back to the tent that they're in. They have to be sober to go there because they're not allowed to have anything on the property. So if you're a person who's struggling with, using substances, or your life is in danger if you suddenly stop using substances, you can't access the safety that's provided you. So your back was against a wall in either way. So it was, there was a very loud trumpeting of these efforts by NGOs. That was 1/16 of the need that was in our community. And the other 1,500 people that are here that needed those services went by the wayside because they did their victory lap and, hey, we did a great job. We opened up this tent city for a month, to provide people showers and food for a very small portion of the population who actually needed it, So I think that, it's also strange coming from one of the mayors in the country who's trying to be one of these leading voices about safer at home orders, wash your hands, follow CDC.
Is this a Democrat mayor?
She is Mayor Castor, who is most famous for her biking while black ticketing back in, I believe, 2015, where she was targeting impoverished Black and brown communities and ticketing people on bikes for not having like a light or a handlebar broken or something like this. And it was 8 out of 10 affecting people of color. And sometimes they would get 3 tickets a day.
And I mean, just putting it into context for anybody out there who's not familiar with Florida, I don't think there's a whole lot of people bicycling who are not who can afford to drive. At least that was my experience living in Houston, is that if anybody's riding a bicycle, it's usually because, well, they're either like a serious bicycle enthusiast or something, but usually if they're too poor to drive a car, or they can't drive a car because their license was suspended because of tickets or something like that, right? And so now they're going after these people.
Yeah, and instead of like, with those tickets and the money that generates, instead of just saying, hey, use the money to get your light fixed or something, it was a way to it was a stop and frisk in Tampa is what it was, because through this, they also were able to, through targeting these communities, find all kinds of violations or whatever they had come up with that they could then use to further charges against people. So it was an entryway into a door where they could further target people. And that's what our mayor, shining Democrat that she is, this is where, and she's a former cop. So this is where she's at.
And then you're talking about also like a city and a state that is absolutely full of empty hotel rooms, right? I mean, this is a massive tourist industry and massive numbers of hotels that could be easily put to use housing people who need housing, but they're just laying empty, right?
Easily be used for that, easily. And even allegedly she had a press conference where she had told some people outside of City Hall that this is what she was planning on doing, because people were very excited. Like our friends and comrades downtown that are unhoused that heard this speech were like, wow, she's going to put us in a cruise ship docked off of Tampa Bay. She's going to put us in a hotel. She's going to do this. And they were waiting for that shit to happen. And nothing ever happened,
There's these speeches. They make these speeches, but then it doesn't happen. And I wonder, like, what do you think? Why is it because of is it just incompetence, or is it that they're so afraid of the precedent that would be set by actually housing the homeless? Because clearly the money and the resources exist in every state in this country to house all of the homeless population instantly.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely a precedent that would be set, because like right now, Mayor Castor is working on a big project in the middle of an ongoing pandemic to reward businesses that did good things during the pandemic. So right now she's commissioning these small businesses or businesses in Tampa that can create sculptures and different works of art and things like this to award to businesses that, you know, gave a free coffee or that, you know, this or that. When we're in the middle of this pandemic, this isn't the Emmys, you know, we need to like keep moving, you know what I mean? Like this,
Yeah.
yeah. And this is like, this is their next feel good project. And this just shows their complete lack of like seeing the connective tissue between themselves and other people in our community. You know, the suffering, this pandemic is not over by a long shot for a lot of people. And not to mention that, but like going back to normal after this is a war zone for people on the streets because of our anti-homeless, anti-black, um, terrorist police force. I mean, this is not TPD. Yesterday I went to do jail support for 65 arrestees of peaceful protesters, and the numerous people that I saw and the people that consented to be treated for injuries had been shot in the back, every one of them with these rubber bullets. You know, that's an act of cowardice. That's just attacking people because
And
you
this is
can.
going on all over the country, incidentally, including in states with Democratic governors and places with Democratic mayors. And one of the people viewing this interview right now on YouTube is Keith McHenry, and he says hello, and he's been facing exactly the same kinds of situation in Santa Cruz, California, which is another wealthy town full of empty hotel rooms with progressive politicians that make promises that they don't keep, and send police after the homeless who they're keeping in the parking lot somewhere, I believe, with a hygiene station. They got a hygiene station in the parking lot. So that's Dezeray. I know, like, you know, I'm one of the things that I am trying to sort of sort through here, talking to different people in different parts of the country. I mean, there's so much going on, and sometimes it seems to make a difference what kind of government is in power in a state or a city, and other times, you know, in other ways, it doesn't seem to make any difference at all. But one of the things that seems, from what I hear from a lot of people in Florida and other states, that are kind of, you know, run by governors like your particular governor, is there this whole, all the conspiracy theory stuff and all the hoax, the idea that the virus is a hoax, and all these people who believe that the lockdown is you know, all about the government taking over. And I mean, whatever, you know, there's all this stuff going around, and of course there's grains of truth in most conspiracy theories, so that makes them a little, you know, they stick better that way. But what I mean, I don't know what I'm asking, but I'm, you know, I know you're in touch with people in different parts of the country and different parts of the world, and I just wonder, this, when you back up, I don't know if you ever have time to back up and reflect a little bit on how different it is in different places. Like I know a lot of people in Europe, and the situation in Europe in terms of government response is like so different that it seems like we're living in a nightmare, and they're living in a fantasy world, which, I mean, you know, they kind of are in some ways, and it's maybe on the backs of lots of other countries, as we know, but still, it's like there's actual effective response going on in some places in the world, and it's just not happening here. And I wonder if you've been in touch with people in other parts of the world. And
I talked to a friend in Palestine who said that the Palestinian Authority is enforcing like a shutdown. And as far as I know, their numbers are very low with COVID, but I think different exacerbations or rises in the infection rate matter. But I've really kind of been focused on my community, like what's going on the ground here, because there's a lot of work to be done. So like the ways in which this, you know, government, the state and city government, has affected this crisis, you know, DeSantis collaborates with ICE. DeSantis is someone who does not want sanctuary, who does not want, he wants to be viewed favorably by Donald Trump. And in any other time that may sound silly, but it's really, this is the currency that that politicians are dealing with. And so he's doing everything he can to delegitimize the virus by allowing during spring break our beaches to be full to capacity, packed with people who had no social distancing, who had no mask on, who had no, CDC guidelines covered or hand washing stations prolifically like throughout everywhere where they could, wash up and keep clean or anything. I mean, he helped to advance the numbers that we now see in Florida by those actions. He's spoken on a stage with Richard Spencer, with Milo Yiannopoulos, with a lot of like prominent Islamophobic, like media sites, with Breitbart News, all these things. He's very known for the very, very racist behavior that he's carried on again and again and again. And now this man is our governor, and now he's leading a response that's going to make or break us. He's opening things up when we have no science or data to back up the fact that it's safe to open up yet. And then there was reports that Florida stopped reporting their numbers. There was 35,000 tests recently that they weren't able to properly read because they were damaged in transit. I mean, there's, and then there's also this really huge issue that DeSantis is complicit in long-term care facilities where deaths are being vastly underreported. I mean, our state has a high geriatric population, and these folks are, dying at high numbers. I'll say through my own personal experience and through experience of other people that I know in these kind of facilities. And those numbers are not being reported because these businesses work off of their public relations image. So the numbers here are so much higher than we can even fathom. And
do you have any idea how high? Because like I've heard that there's been a dramatic increase in the number of deaths from pneumonia in many different parts of the country, and that would be I guess, as I understand it, an obvious possible indicator of a COVID-19 death, especially when it's a increase in the rate. And I don't know how much it's increased, but it's any idea? It sounds pretty dramatic.
I wouldn't even know to quantify it because I could drastically underestimate it by, you know what I mean? I don't think anyone knows, and I think that's the problem.
But what you're seeing, at least in terms of what's the word? Your own personal experience is what circumstantial evidence, or what's I can't remember what the term is I'm looking for.
It's difficult difficult to say things as like, I'll just say that there's one particular place that I'm like that I've heard of where there was a string of deaths, and the state should have been triggered to come in and investigate what was going on, and they hadn't been. And other people had tried to contact the state and be like, "Hey, can you take a look at this? I think something's going on here. I think that there's this string of people that's dying, like." Kind of matches what's happening in other facilities. It's meaningful and needs to be investigated, and the state didn't have any kind of time for that. So I think it's something that's I don't know, emblematic of all the of how the long-term care industry works, and what big business it is. And how, you can't just have people dying from coronavirus and still maintain your high census, Yeah. So, and knowing our geriatric population and the population of people that live in these kind of long-term care facilities, who knows? It could be double, triple, quadruple the number. I wouldn't even have any way to know. And that's part of the problem, is that we can't even guess because we don't even have proper information coming to us of, it's all been made into, a political thing where, they have to tampen down the response, because any response or any sign that it's this severe, serious problem is going to legitimize that, this is a deadly virus that's here, and that response to it was piss poor and let infections spread like wildfire, when at a critical time where it could have been stopped or slowed down. We didn't have to be here right now.
if there had been the initial response with containment of the virus and all that kind of stuff when they knew it was coming, and they could have set up that kind of a response. But now they talk about it like it feels like I'm back in the fantasy land of the politicians, when they talk about the response to the virus, because they start using terms that, like, originally for a few days it's like you heard from scientists and health practitioners who were talking about things that made some sense, and then more and more it seems we don't hear from those people as much, and we just hear from politicians and pundits who have random observations like, well, we're about a month behind Italy and this or that, as if there's any kind of comparison to be made here, because they're comparing the response here to the response in places where they actually had a response. So it's like comparing apples and oranges, right? I mean, we're just in the midst of an exponentially growing pandemic, and they're opening up society and pretending that it's not exponentially growing, but they'll be face to face with reality pretty soon, won't they? I mean, it seems like they can't just live in this fantasy world. It's all gonna come home. The chickens are gonna come home to roost in a few weeks, aren't they?
Yeah, this is true. And one thing that's really frustrating is that whereas the state and their responses, like, kind of, don't worry, go out to the beach, everything will be cool, everything will be fine, then the virus spreads because people are collecting in spaces, and it was fine. It was no problem. Any pushback was just, we were all just anti-Trump people, I guess, or whatever he designated anybody with any kind of critique on him. But now that there's rage in the streets over the other, epidemic that we're facing in this country with, anti-Black and brown police terrorism. Now it's like, oh, let's be concerned about coronavirus now. So now it's time to be concerned. And there was some reporter that was like, I hope all these protesters get coronavirus. It's like now it's being used in a different way politically. So it just even more lends to the fact that this was never about life and death for them. Not with our lives. It was never about that. It was a political ploy to, you can adjust it one way and make it seem like it's nothing, so that it doesn't affect their chances. It doesn't make them look bad for their lack of response to it. And then you can manipulate it another way and be like, this is a crisis and people are out here protesting and you're all going to spread coronavirus. Like, it's frustrating that a true and truly frightening disease that's going around, a virus that's killed, 110,000, if the numbers are, legit at this point, 110,000 people in this land is being used as a political prop to be moved around and situated and conflated with different issues as it's convenient for the people to whom a lot of lives in this country don't mean shit,
I don't know how much time when you're at work, if in the COVID ward, how much time you actually have to talk to people with COVID, because you're probably extremely busy. But I wonder if you've talked to anybody who, I mean, I keep hearing about many people who were dismissing the virus as a hoax, or dismissing the lockdown as a totally nutty idea, or were otherwise basically living dangerously because they were getting bad information, and then they ended up getting the virus and going to and getting very sick or dying. And I imagine there might be more people in that situation in Florida than in Oregon. I don't know. Is that your ride coming? You got somebody picking you up?
I hope not. It's a cop car.
I know.
I haven't spent I don't spend time talking maybe like politically about the virus with folks, but I noticed that probably about a third of the folks on the unit have Fox News on through the night. So that's like a challenge, because it's not something that I ever subject myself to, or that anyone really should ever subject themselves to. So being in that particular environment, in that particular scenario, and hearing the things that they're saying and the propaganda that they're spreading about, it's basically just shaming people that are recognizing health and safety guidelines. So safety shaming people, I guess. And, but people are afraid, people are scared. One person asked me, am I alive? Like their families can't come in to visit them, so they're going outside to the windows, knocking on the door, and then talking through cell phones or writing letters to be passed underneath. If their family is no longer verbal, it's just we're FaceTiming or whatever from the bed with people, and it's difficult and it's frustrating, especially with the backdrop of the Fox narrative going on. It's like this reality that's unfolding right here, right now, and you're denying it in front of our eyes. And I think that's a lot of the vast issues that this like stolen land is going through right now, is that the lie of like, you're not seeing what's actually happening, and the manipulation of what we know to be true, and the gaslighting and all of these like, and all of the just blatant inconsistencies in how the responses are. Like, we had a bunch of white folks that were heavily armed blocking ambulance bays, which is
what
dangerous. Yeah,
blocking ambulance bays. This is a new. I don't think I've seen anything about that. Can you talk about that? That's very. I mean, that's more shocking than occupying a state capitol building. Ambulances are generally, in any kind of conflict or civil disturbance or war, are generally, outside of the U.S. or the Israeli military, they're generally respected as neutral. I mean, talk about that. What did you see?
So, in my community, there was some gathering of anti-safer at home protests that were like going down the streets within close proximity to 3 different hospitals. And their idea is Operation Gridlock, where they're going to block access roads going to the hospitals, clogging up the streets and things. In Michigan is where they were outright blocking ambulance bays, where nurses had to come out with N95s on and have unmasked protesters screaming in their faces that they're fake nurses. They're disgusting. Like, they had these like condemnations of these nurses that had to leave life-saving work, traumatizing life-saving work, to step out in the street and be confronted by people with no masks on, screaming in their faces, and blocking ambulance bays, which is more dangerous and deadly than their whatever they were trying to paint out their safer at home orders was stopping them from working, and it was risking their livelihoods and things like this, So seems to be one tactic that they've been using. Another tactic is storming federal buildings with large guns. And the point of mentioning that is that, we've got protesters out in these streets of all these different communities that face a baseline brutality by these racist cops, with impunity. Like, their children can be killed, and are killed. Their community members, like, these crises that are going on are like, on one end, Trump is like, liberate Michigan, liberate Virginia, stoking these anti-governor protests to have them, have this coup against these safer at home orders. But then when it comes to people whose lives are being destroyed every day by a systemically racist police force, and then allowed to go with complete impunity by a systemically racist justice system, you have Trump wanting to crush these actions, these gatherings with military might, with some fascist like aesthetics that he's been throwing around. But like, you see the difference in response there. Like, disobey your governors to delegitimize a virus that I'm responsible for the deaths of 110,000 people for. But pay attention to your governors and listen to your cities and your police when it comes to fighting for Black and brown lives, And it's just this contradictory information that's piped in constantly, via the media and via like our social media and things like that. And it's just like, I don't know.
What Have you seen or heard about much of a visible far right presence at the protests that have been going on around there? Or like I know I've heard of people shooting into crowds of protesters, and I don't know if anybody knows who has been doing that in different cities. I know somebody was killed in Detroit because of someone shooting into the crowd.
Yeah. I mean, here the racist white supremacists that have been attacking protesters from vans have been cops. They have their military vehicles with 15, 20 of them hanging out of the back and literally shooting people as they're walking away. Like there's a man, he was, I hate saying this to describe him, but like, because it shouldn't add to any of the tragedy what's going on, but he was a veteran and there are the protests, and he was shot in the head in Tampa by these, non-lethal projectiles that made a hole in his head. There's a person I treated yesterday outside the jail who about a portion like this was bloody raw skin from being attacked from behind, and
By a rubber coated steel bullet, or
exactly. And the other egregious part of that was that they had been begging for 3 hours for cops during the process of these arrests, this mass arrest of 65 people, to get medical attention because she was bleeding. And the cops ignored her. And finally they said, if you want medical attention, they're going to have to come out here and take your pants down in front of everybody. Is that what you want? And it was just like this, like, hey, that's not how it works. What the fuck is that, So, I don't know I don't know about in our community, at least, I don't know about the level of white supremacy, playing into organizing, false protests or showing up trying to infiltrate. That I haven't seen that much of, but I haven't been at every single protest, so I don't want to speak on that if it hasn't, if it has been an issue. But but yeah, so far the only white supremacists that we've had to cope with, to my knowledge, have been the police.
I have long wondered, well, not wondered, but I've often been asked when traveling around Europe, like, how come, like, we have all these big Nazi demos in different European countries, and you don't seem to have like a really organized far right compared to many European countries. And my response to that is always like, well, anybody who wants to join the far right and be part of a racist lynch mob just joins the local police force. They don't need to actually form a KKK chapter or something like that. Just go get paid and be a cop, and then you have total impunity. So why would you bother doing something else unless you like can't qualify to go to the police training school or something like that? Which then makes me wonder if a lot of the far right people are people that just couldn't get into police training school, which would explain a lot, actually.
Yeah, but I don't think their bar is so high that white supremacists wouldn't be able to clear it. And I've seen a rash of information over the last maybe couple of years about cops who ended up getting highlighted for, one brutality they've committed or one killing they've committed, having these like Nazi and white supremacist tattoos on them. Or like one person, they found like a KKK, like, propaganda or whatever in their house or something, I mean, it's pervasive, I mean, they're one and the same. They're not police because they're a moral authority. They're not police because they, had some spiritual training and risen to a level that was, in some higher spiritual form than anyone else. They became police because they wanted a monopoly on violence, and they wanted the impunity that it came with. And, and I've had this argument a lot over the last few days about, good cops versus bad cops. Well, it's been said again and again, but I'll reiterate, like, if there are good cops out there and y'all want to not just join a protest when it's handy or go on a kneel when there's a bunch of cameras around to try to act like you're in solidarity with people. No. Like, if you see some shit happening and somebody's doing some racist shit on the job, planting drugs, brutalizing a black or brown person, saying some racist shit, they should be called out right there. Good cops should be leading the charge against the bad cops. So I don't go by this good cop bad cop narrative. It's like, this is you pretty much need to know what this is when you get into it, because the training tells you a lot of what you need to know. And if you want to proceed from there, then you've made your decision. You're no longer neutral. You're no longer can be construed as the good cop. I can't join, a group that has a very long and prolific history of violence and mayhem committed in communities, and racist, violent murders and arrests and brutalities committed, and say that I'm one of the good ones. It can't happen that way. You can't decontextualize it like that for your benefit.
No, when someone can't pay the rent, you're going to be sent with guns to evict them, and that's your job. And it doesn't matter whether you're a so-called good cop or a bad cop. Yeah.
Or if Trump wants his photo op with a Bible in front of a church, and you're given orders to go in and crush a bunch of peaceful demonstrators, you go and do it. I didn't see a cop, say that they were feeling conflicted about it.
Or you quit your job and then you're not a cop anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm often, when we talking about the discussion of good cops and bad cops, I often think about this statistic that I read about in Greece, where I know you have been before, where in the police in Greece, Golden Dawn, at the time that this statistic came out, Golden Dawn, the fascist party in Greece, was polling at 7% of the population in terms of voting population. But because in Greece they vote according to where you work rather than where you live, they know basically who votes according to their professions. And so the police in Athens, 50% of them voted for the fascist party.
Wow.
And that seems very telling. And I'm sure, as I imagine you would agree, that this is not unique to Greece, but it's actually very common in many different countries, perhaps in most countries, because I think particularly in countries with repressive governments, which is most governments, this is the kind of personality that is attracted to the police force. And it seems that sometimes we can actually bear that out in numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I know that it is a totally ridiculous question to ask, but I still have to ask. Do you care to make any predictions for how things are going to go over the course of the next few weeks in this country, or in your city, or anywhere else?
What I see happening, I see, this may be totally off, I see Trump, I see the momentum of the community continuing and growing, particularly as police try to crush and quell these spontaneous, decentrally organized, events that are popping up everywhere. I see a severe overreaction from, I see basically what Trump's saying coming true, sending in military as he's able, or just heavily militarized police, really, really lowering the bar on, which is difficult based on how they've been reacting so far, but really getting, heightening the violence and the militarist tactics against gatherings, because I think that these gatherings have exposed a real weakness in the state, and the fact that the other 3 killer cops were charged, and that Chauvin's charge got upgraded to second-degree murder. These are the men that participated in the killing of George Floyd. That just shows what the power of these protests have done. They're, there's, I feel like the threat of a good example is what will terrify them into taking a very severe and very violent response to, in as much as they're able to utilize military or even heavily militarized police or National Guard to come in and quell the protests. And then they're going to follow it up with some pretty long and shitty prison sentences to try to intimidate people from organizing in the future. And that's That's as far as I can see happening. I also see, like, with COVID, particularly in prison populations, exploding, and people, you know, maybe a large movement coming out of that about, you know, the ways in which, I mean, and there's already, like, I Walk and Fight Toxic Prisons and these amazing organizations that are doing incredible work around this. But, you know, there's, maybe there'll also be more of a widespread movement, you know, addressing the fact that you have people stuffed into prisons right now that are, like, they're the highest rising population of infection rates. So I see that maybe coming to a head. I don't know what else. I don't think I have any reason to feel hopeful or altruistic, and I don't want to paint it any way that I don't feel, but I just yeah.
Is there I know that maybe being hopeful is a bit of an extreme kind of term to use, but at least there's some ray of, I would describe as not so much hope as much as like a ray of hope in the fact that there's been so much widespread resistance, huh? Or is it just not? It doesn't feel at all hopeful to you, like there's any real possibilities here?
Yeah, no, sorry. Let me say, like, I feel inspired and so much. I feel so inspired by everybody that's gotten out in the streets fighting this shit. Like, everybody, and the things that they have faced and we have faced being out there, like, and deep solidarity and love and support for that. That's been an inspiration. I feel terrified to see those movements and those people and those actions being violently and viciously attacked by a fascist who wants to get reelected. So he's willing to do and pull off any violent display that he needs to play up his romanticized image of the fascist, the dictator, and to achieve that aesthetic so that he can win his reelection for the portion of this country that appeals to, you know. But
are the local politicians, like the governor of Florida and any local politicians, are they also sort of trumpeting Trump's line about Antifa and far left outside agitators and this kind of thing? Is that a common theme there, or are they more sticking to the black people burning down their own neighborhoods trope?
Shit, you know, I don't know the answer to that question because I've been staying away from anything that I can't.
You don't listen to the Fox channel when your patients are listening to Fox?
No, I listen to my own heart exploding. But
Yeah.
but I think it's interesting, this whole I mean, it's pretty obvious why, but I think it's interesting, this whole, like, you know, while they were touting that in Tampa, that there was out of town agitators and out of town professional anarchists that had come in, and we all left our own home communities for some reason to go fight in another community and race. But here we have cops coming in from every different, they're the out of town agitators. They're the ones that have come with all these fucking weapons and these, like, riot gear. They're the ones that are shooting people in the backs at these peaceful gatherings. In our community, people that are from here are getting attacked by cops and National Guard or whatever that are from other places. They're the outside agitators. They don't belong here in our streets.
And the doctors and nurses going to New York, they don't call them outside agitators. They call them, like, heroes.
Exactly. Good point. Exactly. No, it's, you know, the narrative can be switched, even if it was, even if it played perfectly into what they were saying about something the complete opposite. If it could be used any which way, they'll swing it any which way it'll fit to try to make it work in the moment. And so all that legitimacy has been lost. And the scariest thing for me is that with all that I mean, not that they ever had legitimacy, but anything that anyone who's not deeply into radical politics or deeply into social justice or racial justice or, you know, immigrant justice, anyone who's not that's not in their daily like lexicon, and they're just, like, I guess, living, to anyone watching, seeing this complete failure of anything sensible, anything that's even attempting to be legitimate, to be trustworthy, to be wise, like, just be like this reality show of like racist trash pouring out, like, for a lot of people, that the fact that hasn't changed people in any which way, and they're still supporting it, or they're still, neutral, it, to me, that's the scariest thing, that the most egregious things that are happening right now don't seem to be doing a lot of the work of changing the hearts and minds by virtue of how vicious the actions are,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Are there, I noticed there's a GoFundMe project going on that you started a couple months ago, and that appears to be still active. And I wonder if there's any particular websites that people who are interested in supporting efforts there in Tampa to help the unhoused community, that provide medical aid and things that you're doing with that mutual aid project there.
Yeah, absolutely. The GoFundMe is for Food Not Bombs and Bay Area Harm Reduction. And if you just look up those words, that's basically the name of the GoFundMe. We've been, so Bay Area Harm Reduction is amazing, and they've been working with Food Not Bombs hand in hand through this whole COVID crisis. And even before that, they have a emergency line where they deliver harm reduction kits to people who need them. It's literally life-saving work that's happening in Tampa through Bay Area Harm Reduction. They're the fentanyl test strips that are like everything that they're providing are services that are meant and geared towards keeping people alive and keeping them as healthy as they can be and as low risk as possible, while they're using. So it benefits Bay Area Harm Reduction, this GoFundMe. It benefits Food Not Bombs because it's helping us to provide. We're doing 500 meals a week now.
Wow.
And that's a great advance on what we were doing regularly for the last 7 years. So we or a great increase. I mean, so we're struggling, trying to keep along, trying to get. So if folks would like to donate to that, but I really would feel like please first focus any support or solidarity you have to these jail support funds from across the country, to medical funds for people that are trying to, these street medic crews that are fighting to keep protesters safe, to medical bills for protesters that have been injured. So this can come last, because we can get supplies together and we can keep going as we're going. But I'd really like to boost those folks and those movements and those call outs that are everywhere. And I can try to send as much stuff to you after this broadcast as as I can get together to amplify those needs that folks need, because those are the most critical needs right now. And I would love for people to be able to support those movements.
Yeah, great. And also, if people looking to find you and find that GoFundMe page as well, if they just search for your name in a search engine, it comes right up as one of the first results. So at least it did for me. I think it probably does for other people. I guess we don't know, but yeah, I'll share that link too in the description section here. Dezeray Lyn, thank you so much for joining me for the hour. And there's we're only just getting started, but we'll stop now and let people process and before the next conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me and letting me just run on and on and on. I appreciate it.
Oh, that's great. If you feel like you were running on, you are really strategically answering all the right questions. But if it felt like you were just running on, then that's great. That's excellent.
Well, thanks again for having me, David. I appreciate it. Good to see you. Stay safe.
See ya. You too. Take care.
You. Bye.
And thanks everybody for tuning in to this discussion with Dezeray Lyn. Tomorrow I'll be talking with some folks in Minneapolis, and I'll let you know who when I find out in the morning. I have a new album out on Bandcamp as of last night called Notes from a Failed State, mostly made up of songs I wrote over the past few weeks, including my latest composition, As I Watch Minneapolis Burn. It's free to stream there on Bandcamp. Hope to see you again soon here in the Matrix and in the streets. Don't pay the rent. Don't be afraid of your neighbors. Mutual aid will get us through.